Hello and welcome to this week's VR Vertigo. So, Sony! Sony recently have shit the bed, quite comprehensively actually. And they've been absent from social media. Why, you might ask? Well, they made a statement, basically killing physical media for the PlayStation console. And well, you can guess how that went. The 5-day hiatus from social media was terminated yesterday when Sony, they released an ad. The ad was for the Fight controller. $200 worth of controller. And we thought consoles were expensive. Now, if Sony were to take a quick look at the views that ad has, they're going to think, dear God, people love the idea of this controller. But in actual fact, no. Because if they go down to the likes and dislikes, they'll find that the ad has been ratioed. And the comments, well, the comments are the Wild West. And they pretty much all say one thing. Physical media shouldn't be killed. And not only that, physical media shouldn't be killed by Sony. And now we have rumours of the PlayStation 6 coming along either next year or late the year after. We have all the technical data that comes along with those rumours, and that's all fair and well. But the one message we're getting is it's going to be expensive, and it's going to be digital only. Yep, you heard that correct. In an endeavour to push and validate their recent statement on killing physical games, they've let us know way ahead of time that the PlayStation 6 is going to be digital only. But what does this mean for the PSVR 2 and Sony's once grand dream of VR? Well, all the cards are on the table. PSVR 1 was glorified. It was being released way ahead of its time, and Sony appeared for all the world like they were going to be the tip of the spear as far as VR was concerned. And towards the end of the life cycle of the PSVR 1, rumours of the PSVR 2 started to surface. PlayStation truly was the home of VR, and all could look to PlayStation as the light by which they could be guided in all things VR. And so the PSVR 2 got launched, and we were very, very excited by it. However, do you know who wasn't excited by it? Yep. PlayStation. They'd spent all that time developing and manufacturing and then neglecting their creation. The PSVR 2 soon turned into the bastard child of the PSVR 1. And no one could understand why Sony were treating their headset, their brand new bit of kit, with what was effectively benign neglect. Doing the absolute bare minimum to keep the headset on life support. It made no sense because the headset was intrinsically good. And still, years later, is good. And yet Sony continue through their internal trials and tribulations, whatever struggles they have that they've not let us know about, to behave bizarrely in relation to this wonderful bit of kit. Especially in view of the fact that the VR industry is growing all around them. Sony stood to lead VR globally. And like so many other bad decisions it's made over the last few years, squandered that opportunity most ungratefully. The story of PSVR 2 has been kind of a sad one. It launched without many of the features VR enthusiasts thought it would have as a given. There was, for instance, no backwards compatibility. You couldn't watch movies on it. There was no magic VR button, which, let's face it, was a real stretch and was on my wish list, but yeah. And certainly no attempt at bringing us any kind of mixed media. Sony did the bare minimum. They did bring us some bangers, but as I said, it was the bare minimum. People who defend the PSVR 2 point to the massive VR games catalogue that Sony has, and yet I say it's not the amount of games in the games catalogue that matter. It's the quality, it's the nature, the style, and the fact that we have so much shovelware getting past Sony's own internal quality control for VR lends itself to the assumption that they're just not trying. And that attitude has carried on, and it's been fatal for Sony and the public perception of the headset and VR generally. Sony spent all that money, and instead of honouring their creation, of leading the way, they actively contributed to VR's difficulties. And so, in a couple of years' time, we get the PS6. And that will tell the tale, certainly as far as VR is concerned. The new console will give Sony an opportunity to reconnect with VR, and not a moment too soon. The state of the flat-screen games market, certainly at the top, is an absolute shit show. And whereas VR has its difficulties, it certainly is a much more credible entity now than AAA gaming. So will the PS6 be VR friendly? Can it be the tip of the spear once again? If it stands any chance of doing this, it has to be imbued with features that speak to the VR community. It has to have backwards compatibility. It has to play mixed media. VR stands to make hay while the sun shines. There will be no better opportunity for Sony to recapture what it once lost by its own hand. And if the PS6 launches VR friendly, there's one thing that Sony can do which will clear all the previous sins off the board and allow us all to start with a new slate. And not only that, it would be hugely exciting. So on release, the PlayStation 6 must have backwards compatibility. It must be able to play mixed media. But more importantly, it must have something new, something exciting to offer its VR customer base. And that would be a VR mode. Yep, a handy little button or add-on that allows any flat screen game to be played in VR. Now that's a massive technical stretch, I'm aware of it. But as far as I can tell, historically speaking, there isn't a single technical problem that mankind hasn't been able to eventually lick. And so, Sony, it's about time you got your tongues out. And along with this new press of a button VR mode, will we get new controllers? A new headset? We can only hope. But it's certain. By the time the PlayStation 6 console eventually releases, we will have a much clearer idea of where VR stands. And I, for one, as I've said many times previously, believe it's not going anywhere. And that's a point that Sony absolutely, positively must be cognizant of. Because if they just release another console, which is just more expensive, what really is the value proposition? Sony has an opportunity with the PlayStation 6 console to not only reconnect with VR, but reconnect with its customers, to make a statement, to say clearly and without any confusion, we value our customers. But if we are to take recent history into account and Sony's rather bizarre decision-making processes, I don't hold out much hope for the PlayStation 6. If it ends up being just another next-gen console, it won't be enough. And Sony would do well to understand that they're just like everybody else, and they can be a victim of their bad decision-making. If empires can crumble and fall, then so can Sony. So let's all of us here in the VR space cross our collective fingers and hope that Sony wakes up from this self-destructive fugue that it's found itself in, that it reconnects with its customers and starts to champion what made it great. A fierce desire to tell stories, a fierce desire to create art, and a fierce desire to please us, its customers. Do let me know what you think in the comments below. Do like, subscribe and share, it really would help the channel. And until next time, bye bye.